I'm Phil Rickaby, and I've been a writer and performer for almost 30 years. But I've realized that I don't really know as much as I should about the theatre scene outside of my particular Toronto bubble. Now, I'm on a quest to learn as much as I can about the theatre scene across Canada. So join me as I talk with mainstream theatre creators you may have heard of and indie artists you really should know, as we find out just what it takes to be stage-worthy. If you value the work that I do on Stageworthy, please consider leaving a donation either as a one-time thing or on a recurring monthly basis. Stageworthy is created entirely by me, and I give it to you free of charge with no advertising or other sponsored messages. Your continuing support helps me to cover the cost of producing and distributing the show. Just 4 people donating $5 a month would help me cover the cost of podcast hosting alone. Help me continue to bring you this podcast. You can find a link to donate in the show notes, which you can find in your podcast app or at the website at stageworthy.ca. Now, on to the show. Carolyn Fe is a tri-lingual actress, award-winning singer-songwriter-lyricist, and Tarragon artist-in-residence and assistant director for Paint Me This House of Love at Tarragon Theatre. She joined me to talk about Paint Me This House of Love, available as a fully realized digital production as part of Tarragon Chez Vous until May 31st. In this conversation, we talk about her playwriting journey, what it was like to be an assistant director on the play, how her residency at Tarragon came about, her time on Blue's Clues, and much more. Here's our conversation. You have something that's happening, a play of yours in Montreal, Go Fish. Has that happened yet, or is that about to happen?
It's a read. It will happen May 11th.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. But it's just a read of Act 1. It's a 2-act.
Okay.
Yeah. Tarragon's developing it. Mm-hmm. But during the process of me writing it, the theater company in Montreal, Teesri, Duniya, helped. They helped. Yeah. They embraced me with I think a 4-month residency online. Thank goodness.
Yeah. Well, that certainly enables you to do both things, the playwriting unit at Tarragon and the residency. That's awesome. It's great.
It's awesome.
Yeah. But before we get into that, we should talk about Paint Me This House of Love, which is really the reason why we're here today.
Yes.
Now, by the time this airs, the show itself will be closed, but there's a digital production that people will be able to watch. So I want to make sure that we get that out of the way. But the important thing is, could you tell me about Paint Me This House of Love?
Okay, for those who will not have seen it by the time this episode airs, I'm not going to give spoilers, but imagine, if you will, a 25-year-old woman who's been abandoned by her father. She grew up with her mother, and all of a sudden her father shows up. And in this house of reunion, there's been lies. Like in any family, there are lies, there are skeletons in the closet. But what happens when as the woman you imagine how your father was, you get information from your mother as to who your father was and will he come back or not. So all these things that are playing in the woman's mind, what is real, what's a lie, how to reconcile and move on with life. Without giving spoilers.
Now, as far as your involvement in this show, you have been the assistant director on the show.
Yes.
Well, let me start with basics. Like, as far as if somebody is like, I don't actually know what an assistant director does. What does an assistant director do?
It's similar to what a stage manager does during the rehearsal process. Take notes. Remember what the director says, requests of the actors. Remember some of the blocking, if you will. Also, assist the actors with their lines, especially with Paint Me This House of Love. The lines are very difficult because Chelsea Woolley, the way she wrote the communication between the daughter and the father, there's how do I say, a familiarity between the two characters. For instance, you live with your partner and it's been years you've been living with them. You're at the kitchen table for breakfast. Instead of saying, pass me the sugar for my coffee, you just say, pass me. And your partner automatically understands. So it's a similar kind of language, but technically for the actors, it was difficult to memorize because they have to understand what the other character's saying.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So a lot of repetition. The actors had to memorize each other's lines so they can just give it a smooth flow.
Now, have you, has directing been a thing that you've done before? Is this a new experience for you?
This is a coming back to it. Back in Montreal, I had my own theater company, Altera Vitae Productions. It was short-lived. I had 4 full-on productions. So I directed 2 out of the 4. And then it was a time where I wasn't getting any grants. You know this story. No grants, money out of my pocket. I was blessed with a good job to be able to afford 4 full productions. But then I thought, I can't do it all. And I went on to enjoy being a performer. So Mike Payette asking me, come on over, let's do this together. It was, at first I was hesitant, but then I thought, why not? Let's see if that fire is still in me. As by now, by the time the podcast is going to be broadcasted, the show, my job's done, and I'm still trying to figure out if the fire is still in me for directing.
Now, as far as like that having Mike approach you, were you already part of the Playwrights unit at Tarragon? Did it come out of that, or did he approach you sort of like from the side, from a different angle, and it was sort of a coincidence that you were also?
I'd like to clarify, it's artist in residence.
Oh, artist in residence. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
There are 4 residencies, 3 of which are playwrights in residence, but my position is artist in residence. So yes, it did fall under the umbrella of Mike basically gave me the keys to the house. You have an office? Right. You want to eventually go see what the props department's doing? Go. You have the key. So,
artist in resident actually gives you a lot more. Like it's not constrained. Artist in residence is obviously a larger umbrella under which to sit. Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. It's quite motivating and quite inspiring. What are we now? We're in May? Yeah. I think. Yeah. We're beginning in May, and I already have 4 plays on the table.
Wow.
And more ideas are coming. So
that's always the interesting thing about writing. The interesting thing about writing is that it's a muscle, and so when you exercise it, it feeds in. So you have ideas, and because you have ideas, right?
Yes. Exactly. It just goes on, and to have a designated place to feel free to do what you want artistically is just it's a dream. It's a dream.
Now, how does that come about? How did you find your way into the role as artist in residence at Tarragon Theatre?
Um, Mike Payette called me in. Um, because Mike Payette and I, we have history from Montreal. We know each other from Montreal. And he came to Toronto when he got the job, and I moved mid-pandemic.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just, you know how it is, paths separate and then paths meet again. And
Yeah.
I think this time our paths really met and we're walking parallel. And what Mike is doing at Tarragon, adding diversity, reaching further, and challenging. Isn't that what theater is all about? To challenge the mind. He's doing it.
That's
He's
great.
doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, for you as a playwright, and I remember we talked relatively early in the pandemic,
Yes.
and I remember you were starting to write, and I remember having a moment where I said, about calling yourself a playwright, and you were so reluctant to call yourself a playwright at that time. Tell me, do you feel like a playwright?
Huh? Almost.
Almost.
I'm almost there, only because it's my work is being developed. That means it's under the umbrella of an official theater. But if we're having coffee and cake right now, Phil, no, not yet.
Never
yet.
All right, since it's just you and me having coffee and cake, I'm curious because I think we had almost the same conversation in 2020 or 2021, whenever it was, and you were so reluctant to call yourself a playwright. And I think I will ask you a question that I think I asked you then, is for you, what do you think that you need to be able to call yourself a playwright?
I think, well, the fact that Tarragon has taken two of my plays and is working it, developing it, I think that in itself is a big step for me to call myself a playwright. The fact that it's going to have a public reading in Montreal, that is another step. But all I am, Rick, is I'm just telling stories.
Yeah.
I
mean, that's the most important thing is that's all any of us do who write, is we tell stories. I think I might have said this before, but many years ago, I was working my day job and I had a lot of trouble calling myself an artist. He would say, "What do you do?" And I would name my day job. That's what I would do. And a friend of mine heard me say that and was like, but that's, you do that, but that's not you. That's not, you're an artist. You write, you perform. Why do you never lead with that?
Yeah.
And I thought about it. It took me a long time to be able to say I'm a writer and performer, and that's how I introduce myself. But there was like this psychological block that prevented me from admitting to that. And I feel like it was like it was just, there was something in me that sort of like prevented me from saying the words, I am an artist, I'm a performer, I'm a writer. And it took a lot of effort to just be able to say those words. But it was really freeing once I did.
Right. On my end, I can comfortably say I am a performer. I feel at home on stage,
Right.
saying other people's words, wearing costumes, and I'm very comfortable with that. As a writer or someone who tells stories, I'm not there yet because there's this little thing in me. I think it's a matter of confidence, time, and even public acceptance.
Sure.
Of are my stories worth it? Will it resonate with someone? Should I care if it doesn't resonate with someone? But all I know right now is when I'm writing either longhand with my obsessive fountain pens or typing at the computer, all I know is I'm loving it. I'm loving writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna as somebody, as sort of like a nerd about this sort of stuff, I'm gonna ask you, you know, sometimes you write with a fountain pen, sometimes you type at a computer. Is there something in particular, like, does it depend on the project? What implement you use, or are they part of, or is each a stage of the process?
I start off handwriting, that's for sure. I take each play or each story I write has an assigned pen, and I have a notebook and I write longhand because I find that there's a automatic editing that goes on in my mind before the ink flows onto the paper. And once I have a big chunk of the story, once I have an idea where the story's going, I retype everything onto the computer, and sometimes I just keep going with the typing. Sometimes I go back writing.
What I find interesting about that, for me, I used to write exclusively by typing, but one of the things that I found that I ended up doing was cutting a lot of what I wrote.
Yeah.
Because I could type so fast that I would end up overwriting.
Exactly.
And when I write by hand, that doesn't happen.
No.
In fact, at times I underwrite, but that allows me, as I'm editing, to embellish, but not in the same way I did when I was typing it. In fact, like you're saying, that when I'm typing it, I'm editing.
Yeah.
And so it's certainly a really helpful way to do it. But of course, everybody has a different way of writing. Has it always been natural for you to go for the fountain pen, or did you one day pick up the fountain pen and was like, this is my baby?
I've always loved fountain pens. I am from my school days. That's when I was learning how to write the old cursive way. The nuns gave us fountain pens to write with. And as time went on, of course, the ballpoint happened. But when I finished high school, I went back to the fountain pen.
There is something about them, isn't there? There's something. Yeah. I always like a really fine pen. Something about like feeling like I am etching the words permanently into the piece of paper is so satisfying. Yeah.
There's that sound of that scratchy sound of the point of the nib on the paper when you write, and you really can't press down hard with a fountain pen.
Right.
So there's that balance of keeping a light touch on the paper so that the ink will flow. Everything, it's almost like a dance. It's a controlled movement, but your brain is going 200 miles an hour and your hand can only go so fast.
So true. So true.
Yeah.
But that sort of reins you in a little bit.
Yes.
That allows you to slow down your writing a bit.
Yes.
So that, you're distilling the initial thought. Whereas when I'm typing, man, I fly.
It just goes everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. I'm really excited to talk to you about this play, Go Fish, that's having a reading of the first act in Montreal, but also is one of the ones that you've been working on. So please tell me about Go Fish.
Go Fish. You have this old woman. She's on the last day of her life. It's not sad. She has accepted the fact that today is her last day on earth. So I play around with the question, looking back in time, instead of what would you tell your younger self, I ask the question, what would your younger selves tell you? So on her last day, she imagines that she was 45, she was 50, 55, 60, and all these women come to her house to play a game of Go Fish. So all these younger versions of herself are telling her what she should have listened to then.
What what drew you to this idea?
I wrote it at a time when I was feeling very low. I was feeling ageism in our industry, and I was seeing it. And I was auditioning for roles that were age appropriate for me, but not getting the roles and seeing who was getting the roles. And it was someone who would be 20 years my junior.
Right.
And I thought, this is not right. So I wanted to write something about elders, about older people. And what I find now is a pattern. Every time I put pen to paper, it's something about our elders, older people, seniors, because they have a story to tell too. I have a story to tell as well. And we don't have enough of that out there. Our industry is geared so much to youth, and bravo. Yes, youth have stories to tell, but us too.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the industry has often been very, I mean, it's this weird combination of youth focused, but also on some level also, old white men focused. So age, yes, in certain, not roles on stage, but in certain office area roles,
Yes.
Holding the reins while young people do the bulk of the performing on stage.
Yeah.
And that's sort of this weird fact of the way that our stages have worked for so long. In some ways, yeah. And in some ways we're not, because of that, we're not actually telling stories for each other.
Exactly. We see grandmas and grandpas on TV, and they're always projected as cutesy.
Right.
Well, we're not always cutesy. We have the same angst and fear and insecurities as a 30-something, as a 20-something, a different version of it, but we still feel. We're still there.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember in my 20s, this sort of started in my 20s when I started to wonder, okay, at some point, the knowledge is going to come into me. The knowledge, the wisdom, it's going to come from above into me. Like I'm sure that it did my parents. I thought my parents knew things. I thought they were wise. And so I would wait through my 20s to be like, okay, the wisdom, the knowledge has not dropped from heaven into me yet. In my 30s, okay, the wisdom from heaven has not yet dropped into me. In my 40s, I was like, is this thing ever, what is going on? And suddenly, I think I was about 45 when I was like, it doesn't happen. Everybody's just fucking making it up.
Yes. And Phil, I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to be 62 this year. I still don't know.
And this is, I think, the fact. And I think it's a thing that we should talk about it more between the generations. We don't know. We
really don't know.
No. And it's, we're all trying to figure it out the best we can. Some of us have a few more years on others, but we still are not, we only have our experience to go on.
Exactly. And our experience may be a variation on the theme of someone else's experience, but it's ours to own, and that's the only thing we know that we could be sure of, our own experience.
Absolutely. As far as like being a playwright or working towards being,
yes,
I will give you that.
Okay.
What is it that as you mentioned, always telling stories. You've always told stories, whether through music or through directing plays and things. But I think you wrote stories. You wrote short stories before.
Yes.
And poetry before sort of turning your eye towards theater.
Yes.
Has that been something you've done since you were a child, or is that something that started later? And what was it that made you want to turn that to something that you created for the stage?
You just made me think back to my English teachers in high school. they were always saying, you have this gift of writing stories. Keep going, keep going. But then I'd write and I'd look at the stories I used to write and I'm thinking, no, not good, not good. And I stopped. But as a performer, using other people's words and interpreting them on stage. And I'm always thinking, damn, how did they get these words? Where did they go to get these words? I think for my case, it's because I'm a late bloomer. My first play, you were there, we were talking about it.
Right, yeah.
Only then did I feel, now I have earned the right to tell my story. I mean, what was that? Right, 2-3 years ago, pre-pandemic?
Yeah.
So I think for me, I needed to feel secure on my feet. I needed to feel I've had enough life experience so that when I make things up, I'm kind of not making it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, I wrote when I was young. I wrote all the time. But I always, when you're young, let's face it, I was a teenager and I was not very smart. And so I always figured that I write it, that first draft, boom, done. And then, later on, as you get a little older and you start to think a little critically, I would write and then I would read back what I'd written. I'd be like, this is garbage. And I would throw it away. Because I had not yet learned that good writing comes through revision, right? You have to write it and then revise it. It's so hard because, especially when you're young, you think, the most pure form of this story is what comes initially through my pen, but it's actually so unformed. You have to learn how to put it all together properly.
Right.
Did you have a journey like that with your writing?
It was, I don't know if I did, because the moment I put pen to paper, or the moment I started typing these stories, obviously late in life, there was a certain confidence in the story I was going to tell. So what's happening really is the editing I'm doing is more technical grammar that I'm checking up. And in a sense, for Go Fish, where it's being developed with Tarragon, the story is there. The dramaturge is saying, well, this is fine, and would ask me challenging questions, and I find myself answering, and the dramaturge is, yeah, okay, I can buy that. Or another technical move of take this scene, move it up, and take that scene and move it down. But nothing to question the story itself. Mind you, if I was in my 20s right now, the story would be, what are you saying? But I think it's because I'm later in life that once it's on the screen or on the paper, it's a little bit more solid.
Now, you've been, following you on Facebook and other media. I know that you've been sort of delving into horror a bit.
Yes.
And not just watching horror. I think you've been writing stuff, and genre is something that we don't touch very often in our theater world right now. There's a few companies like Eldritch Theater.
Yes.
To do. What is it that's drawing you to genre writing and genre theater?
There's a lot of reality theater out there. The finding yourself theater, the challenge, the battle kind of theater. But the fantasy theater seems to be relegated to youth, to kids.
Right.
Nothing for the adults, except for Eldritch Theater, of course. I mean, what Eric Wolf is doing, I personally think is brilliant.
Absolutely.
And I think we need more of that. Us adults were a little bit too serious in life that we could use a little fantasy. And that's why I'm attracted to the horror genre. And horror for me is not slasher.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to get that clear. It's psychological. It's our deepest, darkest fears. If it's a monster, let it be a monster. Or, the boogeyman under the bed, but adult style. And that's very scary. And I think I even told Eric Wolf in one of our chats, I told him, people need to be scared out of their wits to see what reality is sometimes.
That is what the horror teaches us, though. Horror opens our eyes to the things that we're ignoring.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, the monster under the bed usually represents something that we're ignoring. Especially, like, literally the monster under the bed that we ignore, It's like that thing, or the monster in the closet. What do? I'm afraid there's a monster in the closet. Well, I will just shut that door.
Exactly.
These metaphors are so powerful, and they're powerful enough to unnerve us just a bit.
Yeah. Yep. And we need that. We get too comfortable too quick, and we dig our ruts and we just stay there. Put something scary in the way, and then we jump out of the box. That cliche saying, think out of the box, get uncomfortable, or get yourself scared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that I do think there's a resurgence of horror. I think that there are companies that are really tackling it. Companies like Eldridge. They're smaller companies because a lot of theater, larger theater companies are just not ready to go there. And yet, if you look back in the history of theater, horror was very popular. Scaring people was very popular. You look at like the Victorian era where they had like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde on stage and Dracula on stage. And these were plays that terrified the people in the audience.
But they would sell out.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I actually think that audiences, genre will bring people in. I think, we ask ourselves all the time, where is our audience? Well, let's stop setting things in a living room. Let's just give us something to sink our teeth into. I think that audiences love and want and can really be affected by genre storytelling. And so things like horror, things like fantasy, things like sci-fi even, when done right, really open things up and give an audience something that our adherence to quote unquote realism does not.
Yes. And it is, basic marketing 101. You really want something different? Do a genre piece.
Yeah.
That's different.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, in addition to writing, you've done some translation. You translated Crossy by Kyung-Sung Min.
Yes.
From English Korean to French Korean, and translation is different, is sort of like writing but different. So tell me about the experience of translating a play.
Wow, that was a complete brain buster in a good sense, because the way Kyung-Sung Min writes, like the words on paper, it is beautiful physically to the eye. Her phrasing, the way she writes the words, it's almost like calligraphy. So already I'm taken in, but then I have to remember I am here to translate. I'm not here to appreciate or to fall in love with. I need to be business about this. I need to translate the words. So in keeping with the Asian aspect of her writing style, from English and her Korean, and then bringing it to French, where, Korea was occupied by the Japanese, and it was a horrible story with a good ending. It's also a genre piece with ghosts and salvation through ghosts, if I could say.
Mm.
But the French way is not the same way as the Asian way. So I had to find a middle ground. The end result was, she loved the end result. I maintained the physical aspect of her writing. So the French phrases I had look similar on paper when you put them side to side. To find the French words equivalent to the cadence and the artistic way of saying things in Korean. Already French is a poetic language, but poetic in the Western way. And there's poetry in the Eastern way. I try to make them match. That was quite a challenge. And I also had a deadline of a month to get it done, because there was going to be a reading. But I was able to do it with help. Because my French is Montreal, Quebec French, which does not translate to the artistic view that she had with her Korean poetry. Oh, it was quite the challenge, but we did it.
How do you marry the Quebec Montreal French, some good joie,
Yes.
with the Korean? How do you go about doing that?
I did it. I don't know how, but I did it. I jumped right in, using the joual, and joual has its own rhythm. And when I would call and have Zoom meetings with Chun So, she would say it in Korean, and I can almost hear the cadence in the joual version of it, and then the words would flow. But that was a lot of phone calls and Zoom meetings.
Sure. But also, I mean, there's certainly something about a deadline to really motivate getting something done.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I remember, I wrote a solo play for 8 years until I was like, if I don't get an opportunity to perform this thing, it's never going to be done. And so I managed to get into a fringe festival, and suddenly, oh wait, now I can finish it. So, these deadlines are incredibly helpful.
Yes, they are. Because if there wasn't a short deadline, I'd probably still be translating it.
Well, because you'd be like, at a certain point with a deadline, you have to go like, this is okay. Good enough has to be good enough.
Yeah. That's it.
And yeah.
And luckily, she was happy with it. And I think it was performed, had a public reading with it in French and English. And the director, Micheline Chevrier, she loved it. So, bravo, my French pull through.
Perfect. Now, before I go back and start talking about Pay Me This House of Love, I would be remiss if I did not ask you about Blue's Clues.
Oh, yes. Lola.
Because, and I mean, here's the thing. I mean, everybody, at a certain point in their life, there's a number of people for whom Blue's Clues was very important. I remember when original Steve, made an appearance on TikTok and just said, "Hey, how are you? I've missed you." And the number of people that were like weeping because Steve was back and he was talking to them the way he used to talk to them. Blue's Clues has a real effect on kids. So, what has it been like as Lola on that show for you?
It's been great. I think the last shoot we had was right before the pandemic hit, and that was season 4. There's supposed to be a season 5 that's okayed. I'm not privy to that information yet, but So it's been a while since I've been Lola, but through streaming, through YouTube, they have a Blues Clues and You on YouTube, and they even cartooned me. So Lola is ever present, and I get these kids on social media. Like for me, it's been years, literally years, pre-pandemic, that I have not been Lola. But for them, Lola is ever present. It's the representation of their grandma. Just, Lola, can you let's bake a cake together? And this is probably some, 6-year-old toddler who has no clue that I'm just an actor.
Right.
But I do answer, I do reply, and I'm very careful because I know that whenever I reply on behalf of Lola, it touches them. It touches these kids profoundly. The parents who grew up on Steve and Joe now have their kids watching Josh and Lola.
Yeah.
It's a whole generational thing, and I am very careful on social media about how to present myself, because I don't want to break their dreams.
No.
Can't.
No. And it's so important. Do you ever find like you're out somewhere and there's some kid staring at you?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Especially, I usually wear my hair in a ponytail, but some days I put a bun, and I do wear glasses in real life. And I see these kids just staring at me. The parents don't recognize me.
No.
But the kids just stop, their mouths drop open, and they're pointing at me. And of course the parents like, don't point at the lady. Don't point at the lady. It's adorable. It's adorable. And, I have to watch my boundaries because sometimes they're so cute. I just want to go and hug them.
Of course.
No.
But you can't do that.
I can't.
It's funny how kids react to things. Twice in my life, I played Pokeroo.
Oh.
For those who might be listening who didn't grow up in Ontario, Pokeroo is a very famous character on Polka Dot Door and Polka Dot Shorts. Very beloved kids character on TV, Ontario.
Yes.
I had the privilege of playing Pokeroo twice in my life. Once at Ontario Place, where we did little sketches, and every day before each of our little shows, we would go out in this golf cart that had this thing in the back, and Pokeroo would be in the back, and we would go out to sort of gather the kids over to the children's stage, and we would do a little sketch, and then there'd be a musical artist. And so people would freak out. People would freak out. Adults would freak out. Children would freak out. And years before that, the first time they ever tried to do Pokeroo, they didn't have like the golf cart. So they were like, we'll just send Pokeroo out to Children's Village and get them to bring people back. 45 minutes later, they were like, we should probably go find out what's happening. And Pokeroo was swarmed with love from children, but could not move.
Right.
The other time I was doing a stage show of a Pokeroo show. Pokeroo was a guest of the Bananas in Pajamas. And so made like a guest appearance in the stage show. And I have never felt closer to a rock star than coming out on stage and feeling the energy of 1,000 or more children, small children, screaming and losing their minds.
Yes.
It's so incredible.
Yes. It's amazing, that feeling of kids looking up at you, and they're just in awe.
Yeah.
And that moment, when they grow up, they might forget that particular moment, but that feeling becomes part of them.
I really do believe that. I really believe that like having an interaction with a character, whether it's Pokeroo or it's Lola, and have a moment of like, you can't run over and hug them, but you can give them a smile, you can give them a wink, and they know what they just saw. They know they saw Lola, and they know that she smiled, right? They know that was Lola. And so it's pretty massive for the child to have this thing, and maybe the parent, it's a thing that was for them and not something that necessarily was shared with their child, right, with the parent, right?
Yeah.
It's so incredible to be able to share that with a child and to give them that moment of like, see, it's your imagination, you matter,
Yeah. You are real. I see you, and you are worth it more than you ever can think. I love you.
Yeah.
And they feel it.
Absolutely they do. Absolutely they do. We would have moments, just with poker, all you just get a handshake sometimes, and people would like feel so connected and amazing just because of this moment.
Yeah. And so we feel it too.
Whoa, do we ever? I mean, my goodness, like when you have that moment and you know that like a child has had that experience, that wide-eyed, innocent, magic moment, because that's what it is. It's magic for the child. It's so incredible to be part of that moment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just as we sort of draw to a close, I want to come back to Pay Me This House of Love.
Okay.
And I want to talk about, as the assistant director on this play, coming into this play and then being there through the rehearsal process. Did you have something going into this play that you were like, this is something I want to learn, something I want to experience, something I want to have happen? And how did that desire change over the course of the rehearsal process and into performance?
Coming in as the assistant director, I had no expectations because I know Mike Payette is the director. He leads the show. He shapes the show. And I took my role as listen as much as you can, sponge in what he wants from the actors, from the crew, sponge everything in, take notes so that, the days were, because we are human, the days where he might concentrate on something smaller, I can keep alive the other pieces that he wanted to develop on. So I'll just keep it alive while he gets his energy together. And then when time comes, he goes back to see whatever piece that was and see that it has been kept intact. I found it to be rewarding. I found it to be challenging. I didn't sleep much because Mike, as a creator, as a director, and creating this putting life to Chelsea Woolley's words, that's big. That is a lot of things to do. So I had to find balance for myself as well. I gotta admit, some days I was just sitting in the back, especially when we moved into the theater. I would sit all the way up in the back in the dark and just try to catch a breather, so that I can, sit back down a few rows down to be behind Mike and just to listen to what he's telling everybody, for notes and what have you. So
was there something you learned about directing in this process?
Learning about directing is, what I learned is it is still a people relationship job. It is a job because when you come home at night, you gotta leave the job out the door, because if not, you're not gonna sleep well. So I learned more balance during this process. As a director, as an assistant director, I need to stop when it's time to stop, so that when it's time to start, I am really there. So I think
that's such an important thing, just generally as an artist, is like that, being able to stop.
Yeah. And the trust that that everybody will deliver what they're supposed to deliver. I mean, the set, Ken did a marvelous job with the set, the sound effects, the light, the whole team was A1 plus, plus, plus. So yeah, you get a bunch of professionals together. Already, my job as the assistant director was easier.
Right.
Because Mike was able to gather all these people together. He was able to explain what he wanted. They delivered. I just made sure that it's maintained. And if he wanted to change it, then I'll change my notes.
Yeah. Now, is directing something that you see as something that you want to keep doing, or is writing and performing the primary thing, or are you just like, let's do it all, let's do it all?
Oh, Phil, let's do it all. Let's do it all. I'm going to be 62 years old. I'm still standing up. And if I can do it all, I want to do it all. So, yeah, let's do it all.
Absolutely. I think that's as good a spot as any to stop. Let's do it all.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Phil. Always a pleasure.
This has been an episode of Stageworthy. Stageworthy is produced, hosted, and edited by Phil Rickaby. That's me. If you enjoyed this podcast and you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave a 5-star rating. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave a review. Those reviews and ratings help new people find the show. If you want to keep up with what's going on with Stageworthy and my other projects, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to philrickaby.com/subscribe. And remember, if you want to leave a tip, you'll find a link to the virtual tip jar in the show notes or on the website. You can find Stageworthy on Twitter and Instagram at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website with the complete archive of all episodes at stageworthy.ca. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and as I mentioned, my website is philrickaby.com. See you next week for another episode of Stageworthy.